What comes after Paladin? It's the Ranger. All right. So the Ranger is an odd class for me. I got started playing D&D back in the 3rd edition. The Ranger was not good then. It just wasn't. And then, so I spent some time here's the thing. Here's the thing about me. Can I tell you what the thing is? The thing is, I like the idea of the Ranger, the archetype of the woodsy archer type character who's sort of like lightly armored, relies on mobility and skirmish tactics and things like that, maybe hiding in a sort of like survivalist sort of context. I like this idea. I've played more than one character that does this, but I have not played a Ranger. I did actually play a Ranger once in 3rd edition. I didn't really care for it very much. I think that character died pretty quick. So what I've done is I make a lot of characters that look like Rangers. They have, the survivalist aesthetic. They use a bow. They do skirmish type combat, but they don't have any levels in Ranger. They don't use the Ranger class because I've never really liked the way that the Ranger works. Like mechanically, I don't like the way that the Ranger works, but I do like the idea of the Ranger. Now we come around to 5th edition, and the Ranger is, it's a half-caster. It's a B-tier class. It's a top. I consider it the strongest of the half-casters. It's stronger than Paladin or Artificer. But that is mostly to do with the fact that it casts spells and not the fact that it does rangery things. I think the Ranger is... I've talked a lot in this series about classes that have an identity problem. I think the Ranger suffers from this more than maybe any other. The Ranger is just a fighter and a druid combined. Like, conceptually, that's what it is. It is a fighter with nature magic. And the two sides don't really interact that much. Sure, the Ranger has some spells that cause it that enhance its range attacks. Those are pretty few, and it doesn't get to do them very often. They're just, yeah. There isn't mechanically, much of an identity for the Ranger that isn't covered by either the fighter or the druid. So here's my thing. I like the idea of a magicless Ranger, a martial Ranger, as it was in 4th edition. Though I found that the 4th edition Ranger was kind of whatever. That doesn't grab me. I did my thing in 4th edition where I play a Ranger without being a Ranger by doing a Warlord, because Warlord, my beloved. And of course I'm going to do, and you give me a archer archetype for the Warlord, heck yeah, I'm going to play an archer Warlord, and I'm going to look like a Ranger, but I'm going to be commanding my allies and healing them and supporting them in every way that I can. So anyways, what is the Ranger going to do? Well, let's think about what the identity of the Ranger is, because the Ranger has changed significantly from its original incarnation. Currently, the Ranger is this sort of woodsy character who does archery and 2-weapon fighting. All right. In 5th edition, it's got spells. 4th edition didn't have spells, and it doesn't really switch back and forth between archery and 2-weapon fighting as much as you might think, unless you could build it that way, but it wasn't really an optimal way to play Ranger. Usually you'd want to focus on one or the other, and that's still the case, except in 5th edition you want to focus on archery. The 2-weapon fighting doesn't really have any benefits. There's no real reason to pick that option. So how would I redesign the Ranger? We're almost 5 minutes into this, and I haven't even started on my version of the Ranger. So here's the thing. I don't really think about these videos before I start recording them. Sometimes I've done some work on this, but I'm not thinking about how, I haven't done any of the work on the Ranger. So I've not thought about my version of the Ranger until right this minute. And I think what I would probably try to do is give the class benefits. So first off, see my previous point about you cannot fix marshals without giving them maneuvers. So the ranger's going to have maneuvers, a la the fighter. Could it use the stamina system from the fighter? Probably, yeah. You could probably just port it over from the fighter with its own set of maneuvers. And here's the focus that these maneuvers would have. Switching back and forth between melee and ranged. There would be some mobility in there, kind of like what the monk has, where you are encouraged to sort of get in, do a hit, and get out. Except that in the ranger's case, that get out is probably going to be packaged in with ranged attacks. So it would absolutely need to have the ability to swap weapon loadouts as part of an attack or as part of a maneuver. Basically, whenever you take an action, you get to swap weapons. So that you can move in, do a couple of attacks, maybe get a defensive bonus like a dodge thing here, or maybe like then like move away real quick without provoking. So that kind of thing. And then like on your next turn, if you start your turn next to an enemy, here's the thing. You start your turn next to an enemy, move your speed as far away from that enemy as possible without provoking, and shoot it with your bow. That's really cool. That like as a single action, wouldn't that be neat? It sort of evokes the idea of Greymane from Heroes of the Storm, if you've played that, with this character that has like a melee mode and a ranged mode, and the melee mode gets in and attacks as all like the same package, and it does more damage, it attacks faster, whatever mechanics you want to translate that as. So all of the maneuvers for the ranger that engage in melee would be about like moving in and engaging. You can't run away from a ranger. The ranger's gonna get you, because they move their speed, and then they also have maneuvers that get them to like, engage like really, really hard. They don't have the fighter's ability to stop you from fleeing, but fleeing doesn't get you away from the ranger. You're not going to get away. And then if things get a little too hot and they need to get out, they have disengage and ranged attack mechanics in the same package. So that's, I think, what I would probably want to do with the ranger, is have melee engage options and ranged disengage options. Now, you would be able to build just one or the other if you want to. And in fact, I would need to have some way to incentivize not doing that. Because now that I think about it, ability scores are a thing, aren't they? So in order to avoid just focusing on all strength or just focusing on all dex, I want to say the ranger should just be able to use dexterity on their melee attacks, regardless of what weapons they're using. Or as long as they're using one-handed weapons. So they don't need to use finesse. They can use dex on all melee weapon attacks with one-handed weapons. Or maybe even like if you have two weapons, one weapon in each hand, then you can use your dexterity on attacks. That way you can focus on a single ability score and you're not taxed for trying to diversify. I think that's what I would do. Is allow you to use dex on both. Or, here's a thought, use strength on both. So you can use strength on ranged attacks. That would be, no, it would be easier to do dex. It'd be easier to do dex because the ranger theme is that you have lighter armor, and so you need dexterity to supplement your lighter armor. I think having maneuvers that like active defense maneuvers. So while you are engaged, if someone is to attack you, you can use like some stamina in a maneuver to sort of disengage, like roll out of danger, that kind of thing. So as distinct from the fighter, who is going to use maneuvers to like just take the hit or, like block the hit, but while staying in place. The ranger is going to leave. The ranger is going to get out of there. And you'll see this some more with the rogue when I get there. This might be foreshadowing. So the ranger is a hybrid class, hybrid melee, hybrid ranged. So it's like half ranged, half melee. And like by removing spells altogether and making it a martial class, you sort of open up that design space to allow it to really engage as a martial combatant. And you don't have this sort of like, it's like almost a druid, this druid half-caster kind of flavor tacked on. Now, to be quite clear, I think a druid, like a half-caster druid subclass could be a really good idea. You know, the wilder. No, not the wilder. Anyway, like the hedge druid, you know, as a ranger subclass, which gives it some limited access to spell casting from the druid list. I think that would be really cool. I think that would work out for sure, but it doesn't force the idea of magical rangers, which I consider to be like, I don't know. Something about magical rangers kind of rubs me the wrong way. And this is a purely aesthetic thing. Like mechanically, there's no reason you couldn't have, sort of in the same vein as like a paladin, as a half caster, half fighter. There's no mechanical reason why you couldn't have spell casting as part of a ranger. I just don't like it. So I wouldn't design the ranger with spells. And I think one of the reasons why the ranger has spells in 5th edition is because spells are kind of the only way to really do any sort of utility. So you want the ranger to be able to find, find food in the forest. So you give them Goodberry. You give them spells that allow them to create food. You want the ranger to be good at stealth. So you give them a spell that makes them good at stealth, pass without trace. This is the way that 5th edition designs, or the 5th edition approaches giving classes utility. If you want a class to have utility, you give them a spell that does the thing that they're trying to do. And I don't think that's a great way to build a game, and I would build a game that way. I think giving classes features and options for non-magical means of performing these utility functions would be a really good way to take the game. That's a good direction, I think. And the Ranger certainly has a lot of room in its conceptual kit to take some of that. So there would probably be a whole like subsystem, kind of a la fighting styles. Like, you know how like with Fighter, the fighting styles are this sort of like little bitty subsystem that's separate from subclasses, but it does sort of inform the rest of your, like the way that you're building your character. So something kind of like that, where there's a very limited selection of abilities, and maybe you pick which ones you're doing after a long rest or something like that, so you can swap them out each day. And these would be like survival things. Like you can assist other allies, or you can assist your allies on stealth checks for free if you are stealthing with them, that kind of thing. Or, you know, you can find food in the wilderness for up to X number of creatures. You know, that sort of stuff. The sort of adventuring and exploration and survival mechanisms that a ranger is supposed to be able to do well. It should be able to do it without spells. Like, these are things you can do without magic in the real world. But you can't really do them without magic in D&D, because if you want to do anything other than hit somebody, it needs to be a spell, according to 5th edition. So I would get around that by creating a sort of little toolbox, a small toolbox of utility for the ranger to pick from each day. That would cover like tracking too and things like that. So, and then of course a subclass for the Beastmaster Ranger is always good. I actually really like pet subclasses that give you a second character to control. I think those are really neat. So I'd probably do that. I don't know what other subclasses I do. Haven't really thought too much about it. But that's the outline for how I would redesign the Ranger. Make it a true martial skirmisher. With engage into melee, disengage into ranged attacks, and incentives and mechanics to encourage you to want to alternate between those. Like basically, I think mechanics that make it so that if you are not in melee, you want to be in melee. And if you are in melee, you want to be out of melee. Like, you want to change your state every turn. And like, if you get out of melee and the enemy attacks you, then you can disengage again, ba-ba-bam. But like, so I'm not sure exactly what form that would take. Probably bonuses to attacks, maybe bonuses to, like, so here's what I'm thinking. Bonuses to damage if you have no enemies within 5 feet of you at the start of your turn. You get a bonus to melee damage. And then if you start your turn with enemies adjacent to you, something like you can make an additional ranged attack that turn. So basically the like bonuses based on the starting conditions of your turn if you change those conditions. I think that would be really good.